Hey folks, it is David from TED-IELTS again, and today I'm bringing you another grammar video. Actually, a few days ago, I put out a poll on my YouTube channel asking what you wanted to see next, and the results were kind of split between IELTS writing and grammar. And so I've made a lesson that actually covers both of those. This is about IELTS writing task 1, or specifically from the academic test, and it focuses entirely on the grammar necessary for that task. What we're going to be looking at are IELTS maps. So this is when you have to write a description of two maps that you're given. And I'm going to focus on the verb tenses that you need to use in order to describe these accurately. Now, verb tenses are always quite important for IELTS, but in the other parts of the exam, if you make a small mistake, it's usually a small problem. But for map descriptions, if you make a small mistake, it can actually be a big problem. And the reason is that here, your verb tense impacts meaning to a very high degree. By that, I mean, if you use the wrong verb tense, if you use present simple instead of past simple, for example, or present perfect instead of past perfect, you're telling the reader that something completely different took place, or it took place at a completely different time. And this is a very, very big problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at three kinds of maps that we're going to encounter in IELTS. And we're going to look at the verb tenses we need for each situation. So whenever you do map descriptions for IELTS, you will be given two maps. You might be given two maps from the past, one map from the past and one from the present, or one from the present and one from the future. And so for each of these, you're going to have to think quite differently about verb tense. Now, you always want to just choose the right verb tense for each situation, but I'm going to give you some rules, some structures that you can use that will really help you to pick the right verb tense. So first of all, we have these two maps from the past. And in this example, we can see we've got a map from 1930 and a map from 2010. So if we're going to describe each map individually, we're going to use the past simple because we're talking about something that happened at a moment in the past. However, if we're going to talk about the changes between the two maps, then we're going to use the past perfect tense. Let's look at some examples then. So if we were to describe these maps just as they appear, we would use the past simple. So we might say in 1930, there were some shops next to a post office. So we're using the verb to be, and that is in the past simple form matched with the plural, so it is there were. Similarly, if we looked at the second map, 2010, we would say in 2010, there were no shops, but there was a post office. So we're using the past simple plural and then the past simple singular form here. However, when we look at the second of the two maps, we really want to show changes that have occurred. That's a very important part of task 1. So we're quite often going to use the past perfect tense. The past perfect tense is something that we use to show what happened by a point in the past. So what happened before. And it's very useful in this situation because we have a point in the past, 2010 in this case, and we want to say what happened prior to that. Now, oftentimes, or almost always in fact, when we look at two maps from the past, we don't actually know when the changes occurred. Especially in this case, these are 80 years apart. So we can see, for example, that there was farmland has been removed. Do we know what year that farmland was removed? No, we don't. It's very unlikely that it existed from 1930 up until 2009 or 2009 and then was removed the next year. So we use the past perfect to show that this change happened at some point between 1930 and 2010. So here are two examples. By 2010, the shops had been removed. 80 years later, the large house had been converted into a retirement home. Note that these are both in the passive voice. We don't always use the passive voice for map descriptions, but it's very, very common actually, because we don't know who did the action. The shops didn't remove themselves, someone did it, but we don't know who did that. We don't know which person was responsible or which organization was responsible. And in such cases, we use the passive voice. And so now we're using the past perfect tense in the passive voice. Let's look at a sample Band 9 answer here. I've underlined many, but not all of the verbs here. I didn't really focus on the introduction because for the introduction, we quite often we're talking about the image or the test rather than the actual situation. So we often use the present simple. So in 1930, there was a single road leading through the village. So we're using the past simple here just to talk about something that was in a state of existence in 1930 in the past. If we skip to the next paragraph now, 80 years later, much had changed. The large house had become a retirement home and its gardens had shrunk to accommodate new houses. So we can see here we're heavily using the past perfect tense. This sample answer here, if you look down in the description, I will link to this so you can actually read it in your own time. You can freeze the computer, you can freeze the video here and look at this if you want, but it might be easier to see it in a separate page. Okay, so then we come up to the situation where we have one past map and one present map. So when we're talking about the first map, the one that's set in the past, again, we just use the past simple. So here we can see there was a fish market by the port. There was a cafe opposite the hotel. So nice and easy. We're just talking about a moment in the past. And even though this is a whole year, we treat it as a particular point in time. And so we just use the past simple. So all you have to do then is really pay attention to plural and singular form, making sure that you're thinking about subject-verb agreement. For the second map, if we want to describe this as we can see it, then we'll use the present simple because it's at the present moment. So there are some apartments by the shore. The hotel has a car park. So this is just describing the current state of being of this place. What becomes more difficult and what really challenges IELTS candidates is that we often are not going to use the present simple. We're more commonly going to use the present perfect because we're really going to be focusing on these changes. So here we can see the fish market has been replaced by some apartments. The forest park has disappeared and been replaced by 2 tennis courts. So in the first case, we've got the passive voices used again. And in the second case, we say has disappeared and has been replaced. So even though we don't repeat has, this is the same verb and it's just been used in 2 parks. So we're essentially saying the forest park has disappeared, the forest park has been replaced by 2 tennis courts. Again, I must stress that when we're talking about IELTS writing task 1, we need to show comparisons, and that's why we don't just talk about the past and just talk about the present. We need to introduce the idea of change and the differences between the past and the present. Here you can see my sample answer again, and I've again highlighted or underlined most of the verb tenses. So you can see I've got a paragraph where I'm just talking about the past. So I say in 1995, Rymouth was a village on the sea. So that's using the past simple tense. There was a forest park. A road ran alongside the coast. That's a useful word. We use this for paths, roads, railways. We talk about them running in a certain place. But when I switch to the next paragraph, because here I'm talking about the present, I've started talking in the present perfect tense. Now, I don't exclusively use that. You can see I actually use the present simple tense sometimes, but I'm going from present perfect to present simple according to the needs of that sentence in order to accurately describe the map and to highlight changes that have occurred between the past and present. Again, you can find the description for this. You can find the link for this in the description below. They're all in the same one file, so just find that one link. Okay, and that brings us to the set of maps where we have one from the present and one from the future. A lot of people find this to be the most difficult, and this is the one indeed that is it's harder to explain, but that comes from the talking about the future. So when we're talking about the present, we just use the present simple. So to the north of the river, there is some farmland and there are 8 factories. So we're just describing the current state of being using the present simple. That's nice and easy. But what about talking about the future? This is much harder because we don't just use the future simple tense. So we can use the future simple tense, but sometimes you have to ask yourself, is this definitely going to happen? What degree of certainty is there? Is this a projected change for the future? Is this expected to happen? I mean, how certain are we? How certain do you want to be when you're describing it? So we might say things like, housing may be built, or it is expected that housing will be built. If you feel more confident, then housing will be built. Now, some future maps might have a kind of indication of time, in which case maybe you would want to use the future perfect tense. It is less common. It is less likely that you'll need that. And you could even introduce it if you're very confident in your verb tense usage, just by speculating here. Again, you don't want to add in extra information, but my example here says by the time the development has been completed. So this is introducing a point in the future that we're not going to say exactly what that point is. Then we can say there will have been an area of housing built. So this is the future perfect tense in the passive voice, right? Kind of complicated, advanced grammar, but difficult to do. In any case, make sure that whatever verb tense you use is the right one for that sentence and is the right one for that map that you have been given. So these are all useful rules to know, and they're very helpful to help you decide, but everything you write must be specific to the task you've been given in your exam. Okay, here again, you can see my sample answer, and I've highlighted more of the verb tenses for you to see. So you can see I see that I've written, many changes are expected to occur. So this phrase are expected, or is expected to happen. This shows that we don't really know, but it's very likely. It's a good way to talk about the future. We don't need to stick to this one phrase because it can get very repetitive, so you can go back and forward. I talk about the present. I say it is comprised of. You can say that the town lies to the west. So these are present simple, talking about the present situation. Then when we switch to the future, it will be demolished. It will also be built. So I'm using the future simple here, will be expanded as well. Okay, so to conclude, there are no secrets to this. You just have to find the right verb tense, and that means knowing how to form these tenses, knowing when to use these tenses, and being able to analyze the map given so that you know which ones you should use. However, the patterns and rules that I've just given you here will really help you to pick the right ones. And again, I'll repeat, the link is in the description to an article that contains all 3 of the examples I've just given you so that you can read them more slowly, you can copy parts, you can analyze it more carefully, and there's a few more details as well. Okay, that's all for today. If you've got an exam coming up in the next week, I wish you the best of luck. Goodbye till next time.